Hello and welcome to today's video. Today, I want to talk to you about my favorite antimicrobials, and this might feel like a little bit of a curveball for you because you'll know that usually I discourage the use of antimicrobials as much as possible. The reason for this is that usually if you have some sort of like overgrowth, like SIBO or SIFO, or some sort of imbalance in the microbiome, usually there is a deeper underlying root cause. And most often I find people just want to jump in and like kill the bug. It's a symptom, it's a consequence of a deeper problem. So I usually push back on the use of antimicrobials because I want to actually dig that one step deeper and find the actual problem. But there are certain situations where the use of antimicrobials can actually be quite helpful. That would be in a situation like where you have gone in and you've assessed and addressed this like deeper underlying, more kind of like root cause issue, and the body is still struggling and needs some help. But then in that context, we want to make sure that we're going to use antimicrobials that have the minimum negative impact on our beneficial microbiome. So I've got a couple that I want to share with you today, and I'm going to kind of rank for you out of 10 how bad they are for the beneficial microbiome. This way you can better gauge and judge what might be a good option for you based on what you've got going on right now. So I'm going to start out with my absolute favorites. The reason these are my favorites is because they have a very, very low negative impact on our beneficial microbiome. So first of all, we've got caprylic acid. Caprylic acid is one of the types of fat that's found in coconut oil. I would consider caprylic acid to be a 0. I don't think it is bad for the beneficial microbiome at all. It is a mild antimicrobial, and I would consider it a moderate antimicrobial in the context of dysbiotic yeasts. So if you have like fungal issues, if you have SIFO, or you have a yeast dysbiosis, caprylic acid can be a really nice option, especially if you just like add coconut oil to your diet. You know, if you add it to like a shake that you have, or you cook some of your food in it, the caprylic acid is like resistant to heat. It's very temperature stable because it's a saturated fat. So this way you can get it in basically as a food. You could also take caprylic acid as a supplement. I personally think they're a little bit overpriced, considering you can basically just like eat coconut oil, like organic, raw, virgin coconut oil. It's got caprylic acid in it. That would be my recommendation, but you could buy it as a supplement, and it has, in my opinion, no negative impact on the beneficial microbiome. Another one that's close to this is lauric acid. This is also found in, believe it or not, coconut oil. So coconut oil, a bit of a superfood. I actually did a full video talking about coconut being like a miraculous healer food. So you could have a look at that if you're more interested in the benefits of coconut. I've actually seen some very interesting information that this can be converted into a compound called monolaurin, and this is something that can happen in our digestive system. And this actually enhances the antimicrobial effect even further. And this is a compound that is naturally found in breast milk. It's actually one of the only dietary sources of monolaurin like anywhere. So obviously, you would imagine that the compounds in breast milk are very healing, very protective of a baby with a very weak immune system. So this can be a really, really powerful option. So again, I'd rank it a 0 in terms of how harmful is it to our beneficial microbiome. And I would consider it also a mild antimicrobial generally, and a moderate for yeasts specifically. Next, we're bringing out the yeast and candida nuclear bomb. This is something called SF722, also known as undecylenic acid. So this is an extract from castor bean oil. So you've probably heard of like castor oil packs, or maybe taking castor oil for constipation. This is one of the acids that's found in castor bean oil, and it is highly antifungal. It's actually, in my opinion, the strongest antifungal agent that you can access naturally that doesn't negatively impact the beneficial microbiome. So I would consider this to be, in terms of how much does it impact the beneficial microbiome, a 0. It's, again, very selective, and this is why it's one of my favorites. I would consider that it's not really an antimicrobial for bacteria, but for yeast, I would consider this like a severe, like very, very strong antimicrobial agent. Somewhere up at the like 7 or 8 out of 10, in par with even some conventional antifungal agents like nystatin or fluconazole, these kinds of things. Very, very strong. From what I've seen, I don't think it hurts beneficial yeasts, but it's possible. So I'm not sure about that. There's honestly not really that much science. There's much less science about these natural compounds than there is about pharmaceuticals, because there's no profit in natural compounds. But I think generally quite safe to use. Next, we have one of my, just generally speaking, favorite supplements. This is colostrum. Colostrum is high in a lot of different types of antimicrobial agents. Some of these are direct and some of these are indirect. So you've got some things in there like lactoferrin, which can have an antimicrobial effect. Also, one of the best and like most highly absorbable forms of iron. So actually really helpful if you have anemia. But for me, the thing that I really like about colostrum is the fact that it contains so many things that work synergistically. There are prebiotics in there that help to feed beneficial microbes, which can have an antimicrobial effect. Don't worry, we're going to come to that in a minute. But they also contain things like growth factors and immunoglobulins. So these are basically, you can think about these as kind of like molecules that signal your own immune system to work differently. So in my opinion, the best thing that we can do in terms of an antimicrobial is actually to get your body strong enough so that it can produce its own antimicrobials, so that it can trigger this strong immune reaction. And colostrum is literally like doing this. It's like an outsourced immune system that we're bringing in to our own body. I would consider this one also a 0 in terms of the negative impact to the beneficial microbiome. In fact, I don't even know if I'm allowed to do this, but I guess this is my own scale and I'm making up the rules. I would give this a negative score because it actually contains prebiotics that can be beneficial. Compounds that are in colostrum are particularly bifidogenic, which means that they're really helpful in boosting bifido growth. But there are some certain people that are sensitive to the milk oligosaccharides. So this isn't the lactose, this isn't like casein or anything like this. This is the prebiotic fibers that are present in milk. Some people, based on the gut dysbiosis that they have, may find that this is an issue for them. So probably easiest way that you could determine if this is you, take your GI map or your stool test or whatever you've got, stick it on AI, ask Claude or ChatGPT and say, do the milk oligosaccharides in colostrum feed any of the dysbiotic microbes that I have? That's probably the easiest way that you could determine if you shouldn't be a person taking colostrum. But generally, in my experience, very well tolerated, very effective for people with gut dysbiosis, really good at shifting the more tricky, like the gut dysbiosis that can have like an immunosuppressive effect, because it's basically like an outsourced immune system. So I would put this in the moderate in terms of antimicrobial effect and moderate in terms of the antifungal effect as well. Next, we've got a product that's kind of along the same sort of line, a little bit different, but kind of similar. This is Propolis. So Propolis is an extract that's basically made by bees. Bees don't actually have an immune system. Instead, they make propolis and they kind of like share it between each other. And just in the same way that the bees are like a hive, they're like a hive mind where they don't really see themselves as like individuals. They're almost like a hive together where they're like a community. They basically do the same with their immune system. So they basically take all of their individual immune systems and share it into this propolis. And when they get sick, they eat it. And it's like medicine for them. We can actually harvest that from bees and we can eat it. And it is a very strong antimicrobial. It has very strong immune stimulating abilities in a very kind of similar way to colostrum. It's like outsourcing our immune system to something outside of our body. And because it's designed for bees that don't have their own immune system, it's very, very effective for someone that has a compromised immune system. I found this one to be extremely potent as an antiviral. So this is why it's commonly used as like a spray that you can spray on the back of your throat. I also find that it is a very effective antimicrobial and antifungal as well. So in terms of antiviral effect, I would consider it like a moderate to strong. In terms of antimicrobial effect, I would consider it mild to moderate. And in terms of antifungal effect, I'll consider it also mild to moderate. I will say that actually with the last two products, with the colostrum and the propolis, the quality of the product makes a really, really big difference. So if you are on a bit of a budget, these are actually two of the products I would recommend that you spend a little bit more money and get something that is actually like really good, because it actually does make a huge difference. You'll be far better off taking half of the dose of, let's say, like colostrum or propolis that's twice as expensive because it's a good quality product than just taking a higher dose of like a budget brand. This is one of the situations where you want to splurge a little bit. The next antimicrobial category that I want to talk about is actually kind of like a bit of a grouping. And in this group, I'm going to consider all herbs, spices and seasonings that are eaten in a dosage that is appropriate according to taste. So what I mean by this is it's possible, for example, to have like oregano oil. So this is like oil extracted from oregano leaves and it's really, really, really strong. You basically need to get like a bush of oregano like this, like a big, big bush to make like one tiny, tiny drop of this oregano oil. So in this category, I'm talking about these foods, but eaten at a food-based level. So for example, if you put oregano like as a dressing like on top of your pasta or on top of pizza or something. I'm not talking about the super concentrated, almost like essential oil like dose, or like with garlic, like allicin extract. These super concentrates I'm going to talk about at the end of the video. But in terms of this general category, any kind of herb, seasoning or spice that you would add to your food to make it taste good, these have an antimicrobial effect. The biggest ones of note that I would like you to really pay attention to would be garlic is a good one. You have things like oregano, thyme, rosemary, all of these kinds of green herbs that have this, they're very unique, they're different, but they have almost in a way kind of like a mintiness to them. It's not quite mint, but it's almost like a peppery, a cool pepperiness to them. All of these I would include like oregano, thyme, rosemary, all of these have quite a good antimicrobial effect. And we could also throw some other things in here like ginger, turmeric, like things like cinnamon and cardamom, cumin seeds, all these different things that have a strong like flavor, a strong seasoning profile used in food-based doses are really good antimicrobials to have in your diet in a sort of like a general rotation. At this dose, they're safe to consume indefinitely. You can't really overdo it as long as they still taste good and you're eating them in an unrefined or like very close to whole food form. Some examples like, for example, like garlic oil or chili oil, these would also be acceptable because these are not concentrated down. These are still essentially like a food-based dose. And this category is really, really broad. It includes all the things I talked about, lots of things I didn't, black pepper, other types of seasonings, essentially anything you would really add to your food that's like a herb or spice that has a strong or potent flavor are very good antimicrobial agents. The more of these you can have, the better. And really the strength in terms of the antimicrobial effect comes from the diversity. There is an additional benefit in that all of these antimicrobial agents that are listed here in this kind of foods and spices and herbs and seasonings also have a very high polyphenol content, beneficial impact on the microbiome in general. There are some certain species, for example, like Akkermansia and Faecalibacterium, that are very difficult to directly, like you can't supplement, you can't take them as a product. They're really sensitive to the diet. That one of the things that has the biggest impact is dietary polyphenol intake. So not only do these have an antimicrobial effect in a very quite broad spectrum, they're also very quite selectively beneficial to some of the most difficult microbes that we actually do want to increase and bump their levels up. So these are a really, really good option. And this could be just herbal teas, seasoning your food, have like a ginger tea or a mint tea or something. They work, they are therapeutic at this dose. Another one that's very similar to this, but different, and I will explain why, would be juicing. So juicing is where we're taking whole foods, for example, like carrots, celery. You could even use some herbs and spices here, like, for example, like a little bit of turmeric or a little bit of ginger, a little bit of mint, something like this, and we're juicing them. When we juice, we concentrate all of the compounds that are present in whatever vegetable we've chosen and remove the fiber. This means we're going to concentrate the antimicrobial effects from these compounds, but we're still keeping it at a kind of like a food grade level. This can be really nice when you look at foods like, for example, carrots or beetroot, for example. You think about these foods, you'd think, well, they're full of sugar. Surely they feed yeasts, right? Surely they feed these bugs that we would want to kill. But where do they grow? They grow in the soil. They have roots. Soil is literally made of bacteria and yeast. It's basically like an ecosystem full of these different microbes. This is because they contain compounds that essentially are antimicrobial. So when we juice them, we concentrate these compounds, we basically enhance their effect. Not too much to the point where they become like so strong that they have like such a strong antimicrobial effect that they're hurting the beneficial microbes, but strong enough that we're amplifying that antimicrobial effect enough where it becomes sort of like into a therapeutic range. So those compounds that keep something like a beetroot growing in the ground, even though they're surrounded by bacteria and yeast, all of those compounds, the antimicrobial agents, the enzymes, the polyphenols, all of those different things, we concentrate them and flood them into the gut. And it has this very profound, but also quite holistic effect because, again, very rich in polyphenols, which means that we are feeding the beneficial microbes, especially those Akkermansia and Faecalibacteria. And also the enzymes that are present in juicing are really good for stripping biofilms. So if you do have any excess biofilm that might have been produced over the years, maybe you've had low enzyme function, maybe you were eating standard American diet for a long time, this can be a bit depleting for the pancreas. Maybe you had mold exposure like me. Mold exposure really, really hard on the pancreas. Whatever it is, these enzyme compounds in juicing help to break those biofilms down, which is a really important part of getting an antimicrobial agent to actually work. But again, we're doing it in a food grade level. This is not negative. It doesn't hurt the beneficial microbes at usually very, very high level of tolerance generally. Next, we're going to move on to probably my favorite category in all of this, which is probiotics. Probiotics is very broad. there's three main categories that I would consider. The first is your kind of generic Lactobacillus bifidobacterium microbes. Second would be something like Saccharomyces boulardii. And the third would be your soil-based organisms. So in that first category, we could use fermented foods. So this could be like sauerkraut, kefir, or you could look at some sort of like a probiotic supplement, for example, like the delactate-free probiotic from Custom Probiotics that I've recommended before, seed probiotics, Garden of Life, lots of different products that I've talked about in previous videos. These all contain these Lactobacillus and Bifidobacterium strains. These not only produce antimicrobial compounds like hydrogen peroxide and lactic acid and other compounds that basically kill negative microbes, but they're going to crowd out the space and they're going to eat the food that the bad microbes would be eating and produce these antimicrobial agents and other beneficial things for you, like B vitamins and neurotransmitters and things like that. So before you ever would try an antimicrobial, I would always want to be using a good high dose of some sort of therapeutic probiotic, because there's no point in killing things and then not replacing what's taking up that space, because otherwise they're just going to come straight back. Then you have something like Saccharomyces boulardii that doesn't colonize, but is very, very strong against colonized yeasts. So I'd say this is probably, again, one of the top tier interventions, very, very high level intervention, very strong antimicrobial in terms of trying to be combative against yeasts specifically. And then we have the soil-based organisms. These also have an antimicrobial effect, which in my experience is more aggressive than traditional Lactobacillus bifidobacterium microbes, but they're also non-colonizing. So if you are going to use something like Saccharomyces boulardii or a soil-based organism, this would be like Megaspore or Youth and Earth probiotic. You'd want to look in the ingredients. You can see these are basically like the Bacillus strains. So like a Bacillus subtilis, Bacillus clausii, Bacillus coagulans, these sorts of microbes. You would basically really need to have either a good like dose of fermented foods or some kind of colonizing microbe like the Lactobacillus bifidobacterium blends to really get the maximum long-term benefit from using something like this. And then finally, we have the traditional ones. So this would be things like allicin extract from garlic, something like a very high carvacol percentage of oregano oil. You've got things like neem oil. I would even put something like colloidal silver in this category as well. These are basically like mostly plant compounds that are really, really concentrated. I, generally speaking, would not recommend using these because they do have a negative impact on the beneficial microbes. And if you are going to use them, I would definitely recommend that you do so with a practitioner. And I want to emphasize, I would really want you to have a really good practitioner. And for me, in my opinion, the difference between a good practitioner and a bad practitioner in terms of the use of antimicrobials is it the first thing that they recommended, or is it the absolute last thing that they want to try? That's really the main difference, in my opinion, between a good and bad practitioner in terms of antimicrobial use. They really should be like the icing on the cake or the absolute last step if you have done every other thing that you could possibly think about. Because for some people, they are necessary and they can have a very strong therapeutic effect, but they do have a negative impact. They do hurt the beneficial microbes. And I have seen countless people, myself included in these people, that use antimicrobial agents and they actually end up making things much, much worse instead of improving things. And in my experience, this only happens when the groundwork isn't done first. We haven't clearly defined and addressed the root cause. We haven't worked on like nutrient deficiencies, detoxification pathways, and other things that come much, much, much before considering the use of something like an antimicrobial agent. That wraps it up for today's video. I would really love to hear, what are your thoughts? Have you used any of these antimicrobial agents? Have you used some of these really strong ones and they've been really helpful for you? Like I've said, I'm not completely opposed to these. I just think we need to be more careful with them because they're not kind of like get out of jail free cards where they don't have the negative effects that antibiotics can have. They can be very, very potent. They really, in my opinion, I would put them at the same level of strength as true, genuine antibiotics like fluoroquinolones, like amoxicillin, like the actual true antibiotics, and even antifungals like the fluconazole, itraconazole, etc. So let me know, what's your experience being with antimicrobials? Did they really help? Did they make you feel worse? Have you tried anything on the gentle side of this list? Have you tried the SF722? Have you tried the caprylic acid? And also let me know if I've missed any. Just thinking now, I didn't talk about berberine, so I'm not covering that in this video. But if there's any that I didn't cover and you would like me to revisit and talk about, let me know in a comment below. So as always, if you need any help with anything that I talked about in today's video, feel warmly welcome to shoot me an email, support@williamdickinson.co.uk. I'll be really, really happy to give you a hand. And if you have any questions, make sure you leave them for me below. That's everything for me today. You take care, and I will see you in the next video. Bye-bye.